Thank you everyone so much for joining. A big special thanks to all our panelists. Today I am just going to do a quick introduction and then hand it over to Sabato Sagaria, who's going to be our moderator today. So just a quick introduction to those who don't know me. My name is Resnick. I am the PoE Culture Sector Leader. My background's actually in architecture, but I've been fortunate enough to work on galleries, museums, restaurants, private members clubs, both in New York and in London. And currently the Culture Sector Leader for PoE. So for those who are not that familiar with PoE, PoE stands for Pinnacle of Excellence. It is an international strategic advisory firm and with a focus on hospitality. So we have a number of sector leaders based around the world, and we basically come together to help external companies achieve their business goals. So today I'm very excited to kind of welcome you all and give you a quick introduction to PoE, but more importantly, share our thoughts and lessons learned from these sector experts around the world. Today we have Sabato Sagaria representing from New York. We have Nick Lander from London, Mads Roesgaard from Copenhagen, and our guest, Chris Mark, all the way from Hong Kong, who is dialing in very late. So thank you so much, Chris. So I just want to do a quick introduction to Sabato, and then he's going to take over as moderator of this fantastic panel. Sabato is based in New York and has worked for Union Square Hospitality for a number of years as their chief restaurant operator. He has also just recently been president of Bar Taco across the US, and now is PoE Culture Sector Leader in the States and also Hospitality Strategic Advisor. So I'm going to hand it over to Sabato to kind of introduce this webinar and our amazing panelists, and we can take it from there. And just a quick note for any attendees that have any questions, there'll be a Q&A box on your screen, so just type in any questions you have and we will address them as soon as we finish our quick webinar. Over to you, Sabato. Oh, you're on mute. Okay. That should work, no?
Oh, right. Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you. Well, good morning and good afternoon or good evening to all of you joining us wherever in the world you are. Thank you for taking time to be with us. And we have a really exciting conversation ahead of us today. You know, chefs and restaurateurs and hospitality professionals are really a resilient breed of individuals. And we've all been in the weeds before, and some of us probably more than we can recall. But when we are, we know what to do. Put our head down and we focus at the task at hand. We prioritize and we rely on the fundamentals, and then we improvise as needed. And then when we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, we go out on the floor and make sure the dining room is full of smiles and everyone leaves better than when they came. So we also lick our wounds. We tend to collateral damage that may have ensued, and we make adjustments to make sure as hell that it doesn't happen again, especially on the next shift. And being in the weeds is happening all around the world on any given day. And as restaurant professionals, we're hardwired on how to respond to that and how to lead our teams through it. And until now, there's never been a time in the history of the world that the entire industry has been in the weeds at the exact same time. And the innate behavior that we possess when we are in the weeds is key, but the playbook that we've relied on in the past is missing that chapter on not only how to survive, but to thrive in a global pandemic. So today we're going to be talking about how to go about doing that. And one of the silver linings that I've seen and really love about our industry is that in the face of that adversity, our industry pulls together to support the communities around it and the ones that we do business in, and also to support each other and share ideas about how we rebuild. And this is one of those moments. So today I'm honored to be joined by an esteemed panel that is going to share their observations and their learnings from the various parts of the world in hopes that it can be thought-provoking, it'll be a source of resilience, and help restaurants find innovative new ways to imagine what their business can look like in the future. So Joining me today from London, we have Nick Lander, and Nick is the restaurant correspondent for the Financial Times. He's a contributor to jancisrobinson.com and the author of my, probably the top of my quarantine reading recommendations, The Art of the Restaurateur. So Nick, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
We also have Chris Marks. Chris is the co-founder of the Hong Kong-based Black Sheep Hospitality Group. Prior to founding Black Sheep Restaurants in 2012, Chris has worked in Barbados, Shanghai, Sydney, and Tokyo. And today, Black Sheep operates 25 restaurants in Hong Kong, covering everything from Michelin-starred restaurants to casual restaurants. And amidst all the chaos going on around the world, he opened his 25th restaurant on Monday. So congrats on that, Chris, and thank you for joining us what is late at night in Hong Kong.
Thank you.
And lastly, we have Mads Roesgaard. Mads joins us from Copenhagen. He's been in the hospitality industry for over 20 years. He was part of a social project called Alejandro, working with young deaf chefs before owning and operating his own successful catering company for 10 years. He's been sous chef and teacher at Myers Madhouse for 3 years. Worked in France at Le Vue Moulin, Aquilare in Spain, Aquarello in Germany, and Erna's Elderberry House in the USA, as well as Restaurant PSN. So global representation there. So thank you all for making the time to be with us today. So what we'll do is we're going to frame today's conversation around 3 topics that I think are all pertinent to restaurants right now and how we evaluate operations and everyone's calling the new normal. So we'll talk about operations, we'll dive into health and safety, and then also hospitality and the guest experience. So to kick things off, Mads, we'll start with you. What are the current restrictions or state of restaurant operations in Copenhagen?
We just opened. People were allowed to serve once again after a long time without having that possibility. Everything's been doing from takeaway and takeout. It's now actually open again. There, of course, are some restrictions on the amount of people in the restaurants. If it's seated dining, it's 2 square meters per person. This normally means it's a 30% to 40% limitation to the normal capacity. Most of the state have allowed people to dine outside. So normally the areas outside the restaurants are fairly restricted, and now they've opened that one to use that kind of space. So a lot of the restaurants are like really working on the outside and trying to make up for the numbers they're losing on the inside of the restaurants. But besides that, it's very unclear what the governments are trying to achieve here. Not many restrictions have been made. Of course, they put out the pamphlet saying you should wash your hands and make sure that nobody of your employees have any illness or anything. So in that way, it's still very up to the working people, you as the restaurateur, to take care of both the people working at the restaurant and also the guests. So there's no, you don't have to wear a mask, you don't have to wear gloves or anything like that.
When you reopened, what was the demand like that you're seeing there?
Sorry?
What was the demand? Were there a lot of guests showing up, or were they staying at home still?
No, definitely. I was surprised that, I was actually surprised that a lot of people came out. A lot of people wanted to go out and show their support. So I think all my neighborhood restaurants where I'm living is full, and full like from early morning until like late night. So a lot of people are going out. A lot of people want to show support to what it's doing. I was reading some things from Sweden. Of course, in Denmark, everybody is comparing themselves to the situation in Sweden, who had a bit of a different approach to the whole situation without the lockdown. And they had a lot of support in the beginning. And after a short while, they started losing interest for the local people. So they've gone down from almost fall down to like 60 or 70% of the possible coverage.
And when you look at what's happening in Denmark or Sweden, are there anything in the Nordic countries that you're seeing that are creative ways that restaurants have evolved their business to adapt to reduced capacities or any other restrictions?
Actually, I've been trying to follow a lot of my network and trying to ask a lot to like give me some good stories and give me ideas and everything to how people are like coping in this situation. But so far, I've on a blank. It's not like people are not really being. They haven't found the the thing. And I think one of the reasons for that is that so far, just 2 days into the opening, it's actually going better than people were hoping for. Of course, they have limited numbers, but they make up from that. Like, people are dining in early, they are dining in a lot later, they stay later. I think people are very open to the idea that they have the table for a shorter amount of time, so that people can turn over the table more often. So I think people are, the whole thing in people want to help is helping out a lot. So right now, there's not the big need for big creative ideas so far.
In the United States, we're seeing, I think what I've also seen is that how governments are supporting businesses is having a huge implication on how restaurants are facing the situation at hand. For example, in the US, there hasn't been any support with rent relief and things such as that. So a lot of restaurants are saying, wow, I have almost 1-2 months of rent that's looming over my head. I need to find out ways to solve for that with it. And how has the government in Denmark, have they helped support with labor or any subsistence or support on the rent side of things?
Yes, definitely. All the tax have been postponed, so we don't have to pay our taxes in the first part of the year. We can wait until at the end of the year by paying that. So it's kind of getting a loan from your own money. Right now, a lot of restaurants have had the option to send home their employees, and the government will cover their pay until the 9th of June. Mm-hmm. They don't cover 100%, they cover about 90% of the pay, which means that it's a lot easier not to lay off everybody, but just lay off like the most expendable people and just keep the core of the team. So I think now that the restaurants are reopening, we see recognizable faces in the kitchen and on the floor. Still the same people. Not a lot of people have changed jobs or lost their job. Of course, people have lost jobs. 100,000 people in Denmark who've lost their job, but not just in the restaurant business, but in all over the line.
Great.
But a lot of help, definitely.
Good. So Chris, thank you again for joining us, especially having just opened your restaurant. And I think one thing I forgot to mention is, if I'm correct, the restaurant you just opened to further elevate the difficulty level was a teppanyaki restaurant. Is that correct? Chris is on mute. If you could help us there, Lauren. Oh, there we are.
Me now?
Yes, got you.
Good. Thank you.
So you opened a teppanyaki restaurant. Is that correct? Is that your latest venture?
Yes, it's just open. We're very excited about it.
So you can flip the shrimp 6 feet and keep the social distancing. Is that the whole goal of it in the training?
We're keeping distance. We'll put it that way.
Good. So Hong Kong is in a unique situation because, correct me if I'm wrong, you've basically remained open all through this time. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And so one question I have is, with 25 restaurants and such a diverse scope, I'm sure you've had to walk through every step of the operation and involved it. And we'll dive into health and safety next. When you look at the operations, how have you had to evolve those or adapt? Are there some of the most dramatic changes that you've had to undergo, or some things that other operators doing an audit of their own might have overlooked?
I think for my business partner and I, it's been very clear what needed to be done from the very beginning. I think the only challenge we faced is communicating this to everyone on our team to have their complete buy-in and understanding of how important it is to protect our community, ourselves, our teams, our guests, even the people that are involved in the supply chain.
And when you talk about how did you sort of prioritize that? Starting with the team members, is that where the communication started, or with guests, or is it multi-pronged approach?
I would say it was done in tandem. So obviously we needed to communicate with our teams right away, but we also needed to externally communicate to our guests what we were doing to protect them.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And how did they respond when you started talking to guests? Because you also had some prep with this, with the SARS pandemic many years ago. So culturally, was there more of an acceptance to this, or was it a lot of education that had to occur?
I think overall it was quite well accepted. Obviously, Hong Kong is sort of an East-West culture, and in Western societies, there's more of a concern for individual. In Eastern cultures, there's more of a concern for a collective. And admittedly, there was some pushback from some people, but for us, it's very clear that we can take care of the larger community.
And with that communication, obviously you have some restaurants that have reservations, and then you have some that are just walk-in business. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how do you go about messaging guests in, you know, in reservations? It seems pretty logical. But when you have a walk-in restaurant, any words of advice or insight that you could share for people that might be in that situation or trying to figure out how to solve that?
Look, I think we're doing something that's very serious, but we try to keep it lighthearted. At the end of the day, we're providing a service for all of our guests. So even though it may seem like a bit of an inconvenience, it's for the protection and benefit of everyone. And you know, protecting someone against the virus is more important than you know, whether they had to wait 2 minutes at the door longer than normal.
Yeah, need to recalibrate the priorities there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Nick. What is the current state of restaurants in London right now?
They're all locked down, and it's only those that are operating as takeaways that have managed to make an impact, and you know, some with food shops are doing the same, but basically they're all closed. Now,
in the delivery culture, what was that like before in London, and how has it evolved since then? Was that something that people at home would take advantage of? Was it you know, focused on a certain segment of the industry? And how
yes, it was cheap and cheerful. That was really it. You know, it was pizzas, hamburgers, Indian and Chinese. And it's been interesting because a lot of good quality restaurants have opened and they're starting takeaways. Some have been faster than others, but it's interesting. The quality of what's being offered is really very, very good.
And in your role as a restaurant correspondent, you're always on the hunt for new ideas and trends around the globe. Are there any more innovative pivots that you've seen in London and beyond that catch your eye as a food writer?
Not many more. I mean, it's made me appreciate kitchen porters, because I just feel that actually, as much as going out for a meal, it's as much about going out and not having to do the washing up that will appeal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really interesting development. But there hasn't been anything interesting happening in London on this because they can't at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid to say.
And then you had mentioned something about Australia and some things you were seeing there. Was there anything that you can share from what's happening in Australia?
Yes. I mean, they opened last week and they're keen on social distancing. And they're keen on takeaways. Justin Helms has opened in Merivale and said it's absolutely fantastic. You know, largely I think because his cost base is much lower than if he were operating all his restaurants all the time. But of course his profitability, and that's the key issue, won't be anywhere near as good from takeaways as it is from in his restaurants in service, you know.
We've seen in the U.S. we've seen some restaurants on the higher end, whether it be Alinea, you know, Frasca, Food and Wine, where they're doing the meal kits or cook at home, and then having that accompanied by videos of the chef preparing it in their home. Yeah. So that's something that, in my mind, that it's a way of how you can take the hospitality or the experiential element of it outside of the four walls.
Yeah.
And also, during the time, hopefully help educate consumers at home and help them get skills.
And there have been some very interesting answers to the social distancing question. There's been the noodles on customers sitting outside. There's been the pandas in Thailand, stuffed pandas, which are placed at...
Are they stuffed or are they live?
No, they're stuffed, I'm afraid.
Okay.
certainly when you sit down. And then there was the thing that you mentioned the other day about the little Nell.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think those are all very clever. And as long as you can make the customer smile when they walk in, you've won them over.
Right. And what Nick was referring to is a restaurant I used to work at in Little Washington. They're actually having mannequins that will be in the dining room. So instead of having empty tables, you're sitting next to mannequins. I'm wondering if they're going to dim the lights even more so. But it's those type of finding creative ways of just having an empty dining room. Chris, I wanted to jump back to you for a moment. Delivery is something that may not be a custom or something that people would automatically think of on the higher end. And you've had delivery-only restaurants, and then now have you broadened delivery scope across your restaurants, or has it stayed pretty focused on a certain subset?
We've broadened it a bit, and I think it's been a good way for us to connect with our community. You know, we have people that we're used to seeing 3, 4, 5, 6 times a week, and you know they've been staying at home, and it's just connected with them.
And how did that when it comes to delivery, that's something that did you bring that in house, or how does that fulfillment happen?
So we've had it in house for a long time, and for us, we've never worked with any of the aggregators because for us we're a hospitality company and we want to see hospitality from end to end. So I think for a lot of people who work with an aggregator, the end happens when they pass the bag to the delivery company. And for us, it doesn't matter what goes wrong, if it's in traffic or if it's the driver or the guy's late or whatever, it's our fault. Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure that our guests are completely satisfied from end to end.
And so you have a whole separate entity that just handles delivery for all the restaurants?
Yes, that's correct.
Any suggestions or words of wisdom for people that are saying or thinking about taking on that task on their own?
It's a big commitment. It's a different business, and when you go into business, you will not have the efficiencies that people in that business have. But again, for us, it was all about hospitality. So you know, the hospitality component is more important to us than the profit component, as it were.
Great. Well, I want to stay on. I'll stay with you for a moment, Chris, but we'll transition to health and safety. And it's always been a focus in restaurants. And as we see how this virus is transferred, and that there's now an elevated level of responsibility and attention to detail that goes above and beyond the protocols that we had in place before this. First of all, you've published what I would call the benchmark guide for operators on how to look at all aspects of the business differently amidst this pandemic. And on behalf of restaurateurs and operators in the US, I want to personally thank you and your team for sharing that, because it's by far more comprehensive than anything that we've been able to find from the US government. In addition to just the technical and health and safety element of it, you've also, it ties back to your last comment, you've tied hospitality into it. That's something that I think we can't lose focus of. In fact, it's probably even more important. So if anybody that's listening hasn't seen that, I strongly encourage you to visit blacksheeprestaurants.com, where they've put that up there, and it's a tremendous resource. Can you briefly talk us through how that came about, and then how you went about implementing it?
Well, in all fairness, my business partner asked him to give more credit for this than I did. But we wanted, we were concerned with the safety of our team across the board, and we're not a huge company, but we're a fairly large company, so there's a lot of people to communicate this to. So we put together this booklet so that everyone would have a firm understanding of the things that we felt needed to be done. And then we had a discussion, and we said, you know, there's other operators that may not have the resources to do something like this, so why don't we just share it with them? And we were not thinking that it would go as far and wide as it did. We were actually thinking about the guy across the street. Mm-hmm. You know, we're very honored that this was helpful to people around the world, and we were sort of the first people hit with this, and that was the thinking behind it.
When you went to implement that with the team, were there any behaviors or protocols that were hardest to change with your team?
I think there's a lot of ingrained cultural habits. For example, if you're European, you shake hands, and it's considered disrespectful to shake hands. And it's happened to me early on with this, where I'd go to a table and I don't want to shake anyone's hand. I have to greet them. I can bow to them, or give them a fist bump or an elbow tap or whatever. But it's still culturally difficult for people to change their habits.
When I was reading through it, I started thinking about every aspect of the guest experience and walking through the front door and all the way through. And I had a couple light bulb moments where I'm like, oh, wow, I never thought about this. And two of those, for example, were how you handle birthday cakes with candles in them. Is it, to blow out candles, or walking into a restroom that has the motion sensor for the hand dryer, and you hear about how, air circulation impacts this. Were there any aha moments that you had as you were creating this, or things that are most often overlooked by restaurateurs trying to make these changes?
Again, I think that we more or less know what needs to be done, but communicating that to your teams and making them understand how important things are, I think that's the biggest challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Mads, jump over to you. In the US, as one of the things we've struggled with here is that every single state has taken its own approach, which has been very frustrating for the operators when they want to do the right things. And especially if you have restaurants in multiple states, what we'll see is that a state will say, we're going to open on Monday, and then the guidelines won't come out until Friday night. So that's very challenging from an operator standpoint. If you have to make physical adjustments, if you have to source PPE, not to mention staffing and ordering. What type of guidance have you seen from the Nordic countries? Are there any great examples that you could point viewers to that might help them look beyond what their government has provided?
As you're saying, like, I think everybody's playing this by ear, and everybody's doing like small steps all the time. And we had the same problem here. They were telling us that it was allowed to open the restaurants again, but there would be some restrictions. Mm-hmm. Big pause. Nobody said anything more than that, and everybody was waiting. And not until like Friday they came out with what the guidance was. Mm-hmm. Luckily for us, they were not very strict, and they were easily to work around. And Denmark is a very small country, so of course it was to be adapted to the whole country. I think the big thing was that not everybody was like giving the possibility to work on the outside just to begin with, and the smaller parts of the country came around quickly, and so that was a good idea. So now I think everybody is on the same page, and everybody's got the same rules, and in that sense, it's easy to work around here.
Did Sweden have any guidance specifically around social distancing or around how restaurants should operate? Yes,
but they're very different to the Danes, and I don't know, like in Denmark, you're not allowed to get together more than 10 people. If you're sitting down in a restaurant, you're not allowed to eat more than 4 people together. But in Sweden, they still have a limitation of 500. So you can still like get together 500 people. In Denmark, you can't have a basketball team like playing more than 2 teams of 5. You're not allowed to have anyone else around. But in Sweden, they're still operating with really big scale. And since nothing has been closed down, in the bars and the restaurants, what you're not allowed to is not to have a place to sit. That's about their limitations so far that I've understood. So if you have a bar, you're not like have people hanging in the bar, but you can still like see people on all the tables. So they've been very free on that, not very strict on Sweden at least.
Chris, one of the concerns that I've heard a lot from restaurant operators in the US is that the restrictions on capacity, this is one of the challenges too. It could be in some cases 10 people for 500 square feet. It could be no tables larger than 6. It could be 50% capacity. It could be 50% of guest occupancy, staff not included. So so many different ways to look at it, but everyone realizes that it's a hit to the overall profitability. Having worked with this, what type of size restrictions are there in Hong Kong, and any advice you'd give to restaurateurs on trying to figure out how to think about their business in a world where you only have 50% or 75% of the tables?
I think, so first of all, in Hong Kong, we have a restriction on party size. So initially it was 4 people to a party, now it's 8 people to a party. I think that may also change soon. There's a restriction on distance between tables. So either there's a distance or there's a physical barrier. So if you have a barrier, like a screen, that's okay. Mm-hmm. So I could be sitting next to you, but if there's a plexiglass screen between us, we're okay. Yeah. But I think maybe it's time to re-examine the restaurant business. So for those of us in places like New York and London and Hong Kong and Paris and Tokyo, our real estate's been crazy, and we've all been under a lot of pressure to cram as many people into as small a space as possible, because of land values. And this has been the value proposition. So if we can scale enough people, then we can give our guests good value. Maybe value will change. People will go back to wanting a bit more space, a bit more time, and they'll have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. And so are restaurants adjusting their prices, or is it still pretty much the same from a pricing standpoint?
I mean, we're from a pricing standpoint, we're the same, but I think going forward, we might how we do things.
You know, one thing that also I've started, as you start to think about the restaurant operations that we know from previous and how those will change moving forward, that comes to mind is, you know, restaurants rely on private dining quite a bit, and bar business. And if you have, you know, a restaurant that doesn't take reservations, there's a lot of pent-up demand that flows into the bar, and that helps with the most profitable aspect of the business. As you look at these restrictions, I'm just curious how to repurpose some of those spaces, or how you've dealt with that in terms of the waiting areas, or making up for that, some of that lost revenue. Any insight there?
I think maybe just having a greater focus on service and looking after people. You have less people, so you know when your restaurants are packed and you're dealing with the problem you're discussing, you know, you're struggling just to get people seated and get them the drinks and get them the food. So maybe now we need to offer more value in terms of the interaction and the experience, and people will spend a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's see. Let's hop over to talk a little bit more about the guest experience here. And, you know, I think we think about the changes from a health and safety standpoint. We can't lose focus of the key element, and that's of what we do, and that's the hospitality. And I think I'd like to see how we can make sure we don't lose any hospitality opportunities, but also how we can perhaps even seize new ones in this. So Nick, I'll start off with you on this one. Beverage and wine especially is something that's really close to home for you, and a key part of the dining experience for many. How do you see this evolving in this new world?
Well, I think there are definite trends that will carry on. So wine by the glass, I think, is here to stay, and great. You know, I'm not sure what is happening to wine stocks in restaurants. Oops, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, because obviously quite a few restaurants will be short of cash, and they'll be looking to liquidate some of their liquid assets, and they might not be quite as attractive to go back to once they reopen. And also, what future for the sommelier? That's where you started, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. That's where I did. Yep. I still take that every once in a while and rely on that at home more so than at work, but yes.
And I wonder, whether they'll have the, you know, I mean, quite a lot of sommeliers have been laid off in the States and in the UK. And whether there'll be as many jobs for them in the future, I very much doubt, I'm afraid. And whether they'll be allowed by the guests to fulfill the roles that they did pre-COVID. I'm not sure about that either. You know, will they be allowed to take the first sip out of a bottle? I'm not sure. I think it's all very much up in the air. And also, what about wine lists? I'd like to see them, you know, I can't see them be the long, copious wine lists of yore. I think they'll be much shorter. There might be a resort back to an iPad, but I don't like that, and I don't believe many restaurateurs or sommeliers like that. I think a daily printed wine list would be the solution, just like I think the future has to be a daily printed menu. I think these are all issues that are up for grabs.
I think you know, one thing as I've thought through this is can technology play a role in this? And you know, I was talking with some sommeliers about how to go about this and saying, well, is it with an email confirmation that you send out here's tonight's wine list and here's tonight's menu. If you'd like to share your guests, you're welcome to. But then also, could the sommelier be, you know, reach out in advance, and could you build those relationships as an added layer of hospitality instead of saying it's going to take away the role? How can you actually lean into it and build that relationship before they come in?
That's a definite possibility.
Chris, have you seen when you look at wine service, and how has that changed, or any learnings from that?
It's a little bit more difficult with the mask on, but that's the need of the hour. That's more important than some of the next things.
Yeah, I mean, we're just thinking about, you know, things like, oh, how do you open a bottle of wine now? With do you take off the entire foil, or use the foil to open it, then take off the foil? Is it more, you know, decanting, and, you know, even shaking cocktails if you have to wear gloves and you have a condensating shaker? Does that become a pencil across the dining room? So interesting approach there. Mads, if you look at you know, a great hospitality experience and have it, you know, starting with the team that's creating it, from a cultural standpoint, how do you think about the ways to get buy-in from the team, or recommend restaurants approaching that with both their culinary and their dining room team?
I've been asking around, and with my own experience as well, I've been talking. It actually needs kind of a cultural like change in the restaurant, because like what we've all been living with for many years is that you're kind of letting your team down if you're not going to work because you felt a little ill, or you felt a little bad, or a little headache. But now you have to like get that kind of honesty into your team, and understanding that you're not close to losing your job because you lay down sick. But you're letting your team down if you don't go home when you feel bad, or even before that if you have a raised temperature. So I think it's a little bit of maybe a healthy disruption in the teams as well, because we've had a little bit of a sickness in the industry with people like working too hard and working too much, and working in situations where they're not supposed to be working. So I think it needs a lot of more like transparency within the team. And if people feel safe and they feel respected, they're also able to give a better experience to the guests, is my personal kind of thinking of it.
Well, I think that you bring up a good point, and it's being able to create a culture that is safe for people to raise their hands or to say, I might be sick and I can't come in. As soon as you take that away, you actually start to put a lot more people at risk. And so some, you know, the old school way of looking at a kitchen, where it's like you come in, no matter if you're cut, then doesn't matter, we'll stitch you up, put you back in. That mindset has to evolve and help people understand it. And all it takes is the first time when you say, I don't care, come in, and you just shut down that wall with it. And Chris, you know, with Michelin-starred restaurants and, you know, teams that are really committed to great food and beverage experiences, how has it been when the staff and guests are masked? I'm just thinking about the nonverbal clues that we rely on. I think that has to get more challenging. Can you share any insight on that?
I guess we're gonna have to have more eye contact.
Yeah. Because I think about the host stand, and, you know, the first impression of, how usually it's a warm smile, but if you can't see them smile, is there any coaching or training that you do with your teams about that?
I mean, I think it's like being on the telephone. If you're really smiling, people know, and if you're not smiling, people know.
Right.
So I think it's about the genuine hospitality.
And do you take temperatures of the guests before they come in the restaurant?
Yes, we do. We take temperatures of every guest, every team member, and every vendor that's making a delivery.
And who's responsible for doing that? Because that could be a contentious point of, especially if that's the first impression. Who do you have an hourly person do that? Is it a manager, or how do you train those?
In general, across the operations, it's whomever is working the door. We also have people from our office that have come in to assist the operations, and they've been fulfilling this role. But anyone in the operation is empowered to do this, and they've all been informed not to let anyone until the test has been done. And again, we're not trying to be gatekeepers, but this is for everyone's protection, including the guest. If I went to the door and I get tested, and I visit all the venues every day, and they take my temperature at every door, and if they told me my temperature was 38, then I'd be happy to know that and go deal with it.
And most guests have been receptive to that, or have there been any challenging issues?
There's been a few, but on the whole, it's been fair.
Good. Yeah, I think that's something that people are trying to figure out how to go about it. And even, some people say, I won't wear masks to go to the grocery store, but I agree, it's for the safety of others. And it's really, helping people. It's not about you, it's about making sure that the team is safe as you move forward. I was even thinking of, with the masks, my dad has a very dry sense of humor and a lot of bad dad jokes. And it relies on him to smile and say, I'm kidding. But if he's wearing a mask, then it's just going to go right over everybody's head if he's trying to be somewhat humorous at the table and make everyone feel even more uncomfortable. But, when you, as I think about the overall ways to personalize it, are there any buried in this? I'll put this out to anybody. Are there any little nuggets or opportunities that you can see as ways to add increased hospitality through this? Or new opportunities that might emerge?
Well, I think with this temperature taking, you're already interacting. In the past, people may have just barged right past you and said, "Oh, my friend's in the restaurant. I'm going over there." And now we're having a real interaction. Like if I went to your home, I wouldn't just barge through the door because your wife cooked dinner. We'd have a little bit of a banter at the door. So I think that's an opportunity.
You're right, because that is the first impression. And so instead of making it feel clinical and transactional, how to lead with empathy and hospitality. And so maybe that warm greeting that you got at the host stand, well, that's actually before, happens even before you get to that host stand and that point. So, Nick, when you think about the evolution of hospitality, are there any things that you have question marks in your mind, or say, hey, I wonder how we're going to figure this out?
Well, I think the reception area is going to be the most important because it sets the tone for everything that follows. I think there's going to be not much difficulty in getting people to meet the time slots that are necessary. But my overall concern is for every restaurant's profitability. Because I think until they're profitable again, which might not be for some time, they're not going to have the money to invest. And I think it's going to be a vicious circle where lack of investment precludes the restaurant fulfilling its high standards that the customers have got used to and are expecting in spades when they return.
Right. I think profitability is a key one in talking with operators. If you can have 50% capacity, how do you now look to stretch out your the available dining opportunities? And so is it trying to shorten that or condense the menu from an operational standpoint, but also from the timing of guests? Is it looking at different types of pricing, perhaps, for peak times versus off-peak times to stretch it? Have Mads or Chris, have you experienced any or seen anything of ways to help increase the throughput or the profitability?
I actually received a survey, it was by Facebook, but it was made by Christian Pugliese, a chef here with a 1-star Michelin, Matt Orlando from MS, former sous chef at Noma, and Lola, restaurant Lola, it's Mette Stra, one of the great chefs in Denmark as well. They got together and they made a survey asking every restaurant goer that would answer the questions. And they were asking questions, what would make them all feel more safe? Would it be better if we were wearing masks in the restaurant, gloves, everything relating to safety and health. But they also asked if people would be willing to pay an extra fee, like a COVID-19 kind of surcharge of a percentage of the bill, or maybe just flat fee. I've been trying to reach 3 of them, but none of them are answering their phones, and I haven't been able to find out results of the survey. But at least people in the industry are thinking of putting a surcharge on the menus.
Chris, you were going to say something?
Oh, no, I was.
Have you seen, are people looking at how you write a menu differently, or, with the condensed, seating capacities, are there other ways that you're looking for additional revenue streams or to increase the throughput?
I think I'm going back to Nick's point. He was saying that there's been excellence, and he thinks that that's going to be eroded. And I think that maybe the attitude needs to be that we're going to commit to excellence, but we're going to commit to it in certain areas. So I think at a certain point in these highly developed urban areas like New York, London, Tokyo, Hong Kong, people become a little bit spoiled, and so I think maybe we say, in this restaurant we're going to be committed to excellent wine service, and whatever else. And this is the history of restaurants. Restaurants used to be a lot more specialized, but I think consumers have come to expect everything in every good restaurant. That the service will be excellent, the decor will be excellent, that the food will be excellent, that they'll have Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera. And I think maybe we'll go back to a point where people say, I'm willing to pay for this, and if I get it, I'm happy, and I'm not worried about the other stuff.
You're right. I'm just thinking about, Japan, how they have restaurants that are so focused on one specific specialty, and that's what you go there for. And to the point of how can you streamline it and really just you master that specific aspect of the craft.
And you can't expect to have a cup of coffee there.
Let's see, Nick, there was a question for you in terms of as I look at some of these questions, as you look at your best guess of the dining experience for London, and what would change most from the guest perspective.
You mean when will restaurants open?
Well, that could be one, or I think it just says, how will the dining experience in London change for the most?
Well, I was very taken by Chris's comment. I had I've been saying this for a long time, that actually the level and quality of restaurants has never ever been higher than before COVID-19. Everything was fantastic. You couldn't open without terrific cooking. You couldn't open without a terrific wine list. You couldn't open without terrific service. And actually, I think, in a way, the customers had got used to all of this and for not paying for it. And something has to give. You can't carry on, especially after you've been closed for 6 or 9 months or possibly longer. And then when you reopen, it's at 50% capacity. You can't carry on providing all of these things. And I think it's going to be that there will be a differentiation in the market. People will go to certain restaurants for certain things, and it'll be up to the restaurateurs to deliver them. But I think this ubiquity of excellence, which there has been until today, is over.
I think the challenge with it is also, in the U.S., we open and we end up in a recession, which headed that direction. The ability to charge more sort of goes against
out of the window. Yeah.
And it's sort of juggling. That's the biggest unknown is the demand. What are you all seeing? When restaurants reopen in various parts of the world, Do guests come out? Are they spending as much? Is the frequency as much, or are they still timid? I'll put that out to anybody that might have observations from your part of the world.
Well, from our part of the world, we didn't close, but we have had incredible support from our guests. Business has been quite brisk. We're seeing a little bit less early week business, and obviously there's less business dining, but there's been a lot of support, and a lot of people have come out and said, we want to support you, we love you guys, and we want to make sure that you guys are still in business.
Great.
Sabato, maybe we could talk, there's a question here about, is there a particular demographic to those going out? So those much younger and less at risk, do they seem to be the most predominant guests, or is it a wide range of people?
We've seen a wide range of people.
So it hasn't really shifted that much, which is good. One question that it's interesting, and I'll put this out to Chris and Mads. The question is, if you were not in the industry today, would you enter the industry now?
Yes, I wouldn't live without it. Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to start now. I think that I would hate to be in the situation with the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. If you already have like the set business, I think that's much more difficult than to start from new. I started up with a new restaurant and everything just when the financial crisis back in the days were at its highest, and I thought it taught me to be only buying what was necessary and only doing what was necessary to get by, and then expand whenever I could. So it's just another mindset. Right now, everybody can do everything. As you're saying, in London, investors are willing to pay and everything, and that's going to be a little bit more tough right now. But yeah, I'll definitely enter the business. Yeah.
I'm going to ask one more question that ties into that, and then I'll have Lauren do the Q&A. And I'm a firm believer that in all of this adversity, there's a bounty of opportunity that is just waiting to be discovered. So what are you most excited about, or where do you see the biggest opportunities for innovation or reinvention as restaurants move forward? Nick, can I start with you and put you on the spot?
Very tricky question, that, because it's 2.5 months since I've been in a restaurant. I can barely recollect, it's that. But I think they'll be smaller, more distinctive, and there'll be a return possibly even to the 1970s.
And what does that look like? Because that was before.
They're small, family-run, and that serve very good food and wine. And they are limited in their range.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something, master of one, not whatever the rest of the phrase, but I think that's the future for me.
Chris, anything that you see as an exciting opportunity for innovation or reinvention as we look forward, or that you'd like to see?
I think there's tons of opportunities. I would have to second Nick. I was actually, last night I went to a very old-fashioned continental restaurant that might seem passé. And as I was there, I was thinking, like, maybe this is the near-term future design. The millennials are getting a bit older. Do they want to wait in line? Do they want to be somewhere where they can't hear each other, where they're cheek and jowl, and maybe having a table that's 1 meter in size, and you're not hearing the next person's conversation is the way things are going to be for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mads?
Yeah, I agree. I just, white stripes, little room, no? Get back to where you feel comfortable and what you do best. I think a lot of chefs would thrive and get new good ideas in doing that. Just get back, working your part, making good food and make the good service, instead of trying to make everything be as enormous and big and impressive as it's right now. So yeah,
I think I agree with what you were saying, and I think it is an opportunity in the U.S. where a lot of restaurants had to let go of their entire teams. You're now actually having an opportunity to rebuild your team based on the environment you see, or to whatever shift or pivot in your business plan. And so it can be more bespoke to that, which I think is exciting. I think it's also an opportunity where, as you're building a team, diversity has been something that's really been important, and I think will help continue to shape our restaurants and our industry. And so to be able to build a more diverse team is something that is an opportunity with that. And the focus of the menus, I completely agree with you. I mean, I don't think you need to have 10 appetizers, 10 courses, 10 entrees, but to go back to the more romantic menus that we've all been to, those places where there's a chalkboard, and here's the 3 apps, 3 entrees, and 2 desserts, and you order all at once. And if that can actually allow as you all were saying, the restaurant to focus on the execution of those and make sure that they're executed brilliantly, then that's a win for everyone. And I don't think the menu has to change every single day, because your guests aren't going there every single day. But maybe if you have that menu for a week, and then the next week it can still scratch that creative itch, and your team gets to get familiar with it. So I think it's almost like you were saying, back to the basics in a way, but not to the basics in just as in the USA, it's just fried chicken and burgers and that's what it is. But going back even further to some of that more the classics in some sense, at least in the restaurant structure. So great. Lauren, do you want to take some questions that we have and field some of those?
There's one here that's very brief. It says virtual dining ? So I guess that's a question. Has anyone heard of or been involved in any innovative virtual dining opportunities? No?
I have not. I have purchased the closest thing I could say to that was, it wasn't virtual, but I purchased one from Blue Hills Stone Barns, and they delivered it to the city, and I walked over, and it was very interesting. I told my girlfriend, I said, we're going to go out for a surprise, and she was all excited. And so we walked over to Blue Hill and got this box and saw the box, and the anticipation, it was almost like, oh, we're going to a restaurant again, in the enthusiasm. We haven't been to restaurants in months, and then taking it home and opening it up. And they did a fantastic job of how they presented it. And it was like Christmas. You're unwrapping each gift, and we cooked it, and there's some snacks, and it was interactive. It was something that we did together, and it was interesting that qualifies for a special occasion now, or a date, or a night out. But they did a great job. But it shows the different touch points along the way, from how the person delivered it to the overall packaging was still very much on brand with it. And so that's the closest I've had, but it also made me smile and made me happy, and that's what hospitality is all about. So they checked that box and exceeded my expectations.
That's amazing. Thanks, Sabato. Question for you, Nick. Are you hearing anything about timings for the opening of the UK hospitality industry beyond what's in the press?
Not very much. I'm afraid I'm no fan of the current government's handling of our COVID, and it could be July, it could be much later. I just don't know. Sorry.
I thought you were the one making the call, Nick.
If I were, they'd all be open, Sabato.
There's a question here in regards to the impact on buffet and salad bar trends. Will restaurants, i.e. chain restaurants, survive, or will customers go back to it simply because of dollar value? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think these.
Go ahead, Chris. You have more insight than I would probably.
I think these things are cyclical. So we'll have a pandemic, and everyone will be. The big concerns will be health, hygiene, and then over time, they'll forget about it and then go back to these ways, and then it'll happen again. And maybe 15 years, maybe 20 years. But it's right now everyone's concerned about health and safety. But then as health and safety becomes less of a concern in people's hierarchy of needs, they'll be looking for different things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's a question here in regards to, if there's so many innovations going on that is not traditional to restaurants, will these innovations change the brand narrative of restaurants, e.g. delivery at high-end restaurants? Will this carry on past COVID? So I think the question is, obviously we're forced to be innovative now because we have to reinvent. Do you think this innovation will keep going, or do we have to wait to another pandemic or crisis in order to start reinventing hospitality?
I can offer my 2 cents. I'd love to hear what the others think. I think it has to, and I hope it does, or because one of the things this has brought to light in the US is how fragile the restaurant business and the restaurant industry was. And so people are now trying to say, how can I diversify my revenue stream that's still an on-brand manner, whether it's takeaway, whether it's turning into a trading post or a grocery store. And wouldn't it be great if they could actually have some of these businesses that emerge out of it, and it can reduce the overhead and it could help protect them against some of these things? Talking with a lot of restaurateurs lately, they're viewing it as the longer that I can stay open without opening my front doors, then that's what's going to help set me up for success in the long run, because I can get my margins down. If there is a second, flare up of this, then I can ride out that wave. And the last thing anybody wants is to open their doors and have somebody come in and think that they may have gotten the virus at their restaurant and have to shut it down again, which would be devastating. So I think looking for diverse and innovative revenue streams to offset your inside the four walls revenue is going to be key as we move forward, and will change, at least in the major cities, the outlook on what a restaurant is.
Thanks, Sabato. There's the last question here, which is quite long. I'll try and read it all. In the UK, there is a trend of virtual supper clubs, which is presently more grassroots, often organised by those outside conventional industry who've invited furlough chefs. I'm frankly amazed restaurants haven't adopted this. Some are supplying all ingredients, plus cocktails to assemble, and wine charging 40 to 45 pounds a head. Surely potential, quite remunerative, and connect directly with customers to cook and eat together. Something restaurants to look at, perhaps.
Yeah, perhaps.
I think it does. I mean, I think it does go to what we were speaking about before, and in what we've seen in the United States is some restaurants and some states have been able to do that. Bars, for example, I think are particularly hard hit, and in New York, bars are now able to sell cocktails to go, which they weren't permitted to do before. So that's been a lifeline to them. Or for restaurants that need cash, they're selling their cellars. That's not going to last forever, but it's getting scrappy and doing what has to be done.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have today. And I just want to thank all of our incredible panelists, and thanks to Sabato for moderating. It's been amazing, and really look forward to our next PoE webinar series, and we'll be sending out some details on that shortly. So,
thank you, Lauren, and thank everybody. Stay safe and keep looking at that glass half full.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sabato. Nice to see you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you, Mads.